Castlevania was a long time coming if you were a Sega fan. From Haunted Castle in the arcade to the first 3 NES games, Konami didn't even give Sega a sniff of garlic strong enough to have old Dracula reaching for his eye wash kit, let alone reconsider his poor life choices. Even the Game Boy was being lavished with that Vania action long before Sega. Konami were bang out of order, and in fact Sega got so fed up of being mugged off by them that they had a punt at making their own version. And it wasn't a bad crack of the whip in fairness. But finally, after many years, Konami sorted themselves out and set their sights on Sega's super popular 16-bit wonder, the Mega Drive. And so, Konami gathered their chisels and set about the finest slab of granite the Mega Drive had to offer, carving out a masterpiece that would sit proudly aloft any imposing tower on Dracula's foreboding castle, the result of which is still one of my favourite Mega Drive games to this day. Castlevania Bloodlines, or New Generation if you're in Power Regions, is a fantastic game that could give any of the series a serious run for its money, and is often ranked up there with the very best. It goes for a bit these days, but you can play it on the Mega Drive Mini, and if you can, you really should. It's a fine title if ever there was one. Thus, with their foot in the door and getting a decent taste for all things Sega, Konami ventured forth into their wonderful world. Unfortunately, their next attempt took a bit of a misstep, as they started production on a 32X Castlevania known as Castlevania the Bloodletting, which was a name found in a Chicago CES brochure, as well as a trademark filed by Konami in 1995. Although Koji Igarashi, the series producer, has mentioned the game's actual title had never been officially nailed down. There was never too much out there on this game save for vague bits of information. However, some spriteware intended for the game was released, showing the characters Richter, Maria, and a character only known as Richter's rival. Although this game never got far into development, with the 32X's brief life, a number of the team members disbanded from the 32X project did reform and go on to spawn what then became an all-time classic, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. While this game originally hit the PS1, it did eventually find its way to the Sega Saturn, albeit in what was seemingly a rushed conversion that did little to utilise the Saturn's superior 2D capabilities. Still, I've beaten it a few times, and I still find it jolly good fun. Plus, we get the secret garden, so still, screw you Sony. But all this leads to today's topic, Castlevania Resurrection for the Dreamcast. Now there was a moment in time where things felt like they were going right for Dreamcast. After the biggest release of any entertainment product in history, the wind was in Sega's sails. Alongside Sega's excellent offerings, former rivals Namco were bringing titles like Soul Calibur over to sun itself under the Sega blue skies, Capcom were furnishing the place with the latest Resident Evil with Code Veronica, and Konami were getting involved with the announcement of the newest Castlevania. And while the N64 had gotten the ball rolling on the 3D incarnation of the series with 2 relatively poorly received offerings, the early screenshots for the Dreamcast version were looking far more promising. Based off of the exploits of Sonia Belmont as a follow-up to the Game Boy title Castlevania Legends, Castlevania Resurrection was set to see Sonia continue the whip-cracking adventures of the Belmonts. However, in March 2000, the game was unceremoniously cancelled, with various reasons being attributed to the decision. From the Dreamcast ailing fortunes coupled with the Unicron-like menace of the PS2 launch closing in overhead, to rumoured disagreements between branches of Konami, with the Japanese team highly critical of the American side's work as lead development on Resurrection, with comments such as it would be better to scrap the game entirely and start from scratch. Things were clearly awry, and whatever the problems ended up being, we never got the game. A real shame, especially as I've been very excited about experiencing some supernatural slaying antics on the good ship DC. But I always wondered how far along development had it actually gotten. The game had been in production for a while, and pictures seemed to be showing quite a few scenarios in magazines, so I could only imagine that they'd gotten a decent way into it. In fact, in the ensuing years, a full original soundtrack for the game was released online, having been completed in its entirety. Pretty darn good it was too. But alas, we never got to experience the fruits of the labour, and in a brutal twist of fate, Not only was the game canned, but the entire canon of Sonia Belmont and her shenanigans were removed from the franchise. Harsh! For many years I wondered what could have been, even reporting on what little there ended up being from magazine screenshots on our blog Griggerig. And while there were reports of no gameplay footage existing of Resurrection, there actually was a very brief video that had been floating around the depths of YouTube with a particularly quick-footed Sonia zipping around in seemingly very early stages of development. More commonly found was the opening CG movie from the game, which had been doing the rounds for many years. But outside of this, we had nothing. The game was dead, seemingly never to be heard from again. So imagine my surprise when, completely out of the blue, news began to hit that a development disc of Castlevania Resurrection had been found after the channel CVR Exists started posting footage of them popping the disc into a Dreamcast and playing through a bunch of levels from the game. Back in 2021, this whipped up quite the storm, and news of a lost Castlevania game emerging from the developmental abyss had a lot of people excited as the gaming community pleaded in unity for the ROM to be dumped for all to enjoy. The story of this demo disc was a tale all of its own, with the will they won't they back and forth leaving everyone unsure as to whether we were going to get it or not. The hyped and then cancelled sale of the disc didn't help things, with the copy potentially falling into the clutches of a wealthy buyer for their own private collection, as many other things have, until the owner pulled it and finally did put the ROM online. But here we are, with the unfinished code giving us a glimpse of the game I was so looking forward to but ultimately never got. Until now. Let's check it out and see what it's like. Castlevania Resurrection on Dreamcast. Man, I was hyped about this, and now finally, so many years later, I can fire it up. This is really cool. But what do we actually have here? So apparently, later builds of the game are known to have existed, but I guess something is better than nothing here. So the demo opens with the familiar old school Konami logo that looks way better than the one they changed it to, but skipping past it reveals the game's title screen, and rather nice it is too. But we ain't here to go up at that, not that it really appears for long anyway. Let's crack on with the game. So the game opens at what it calls the courtyard, where you find yourself in an open area, and straight out of the gate we've got enemies accosting us round the first corner. Getting a feeling for the character's capabilities and movements, the first thing we need to do is take them out and get a handle on what the controls are. So we've got the whip, some kind of close range sword attack, and a jump. Standard Castlevania fare. And after taking out some familiar looking foes, it would also seem that the heart powered sub weapons are all present and correct also. Here I've grabbed the holy water and I'm splashing it around like it's going out of fashion. It all plays fairly well, with Sonia's movement pretty reflective of what I'm trying to do. Although the wayward camera has me constantly tapping the button to recenter it so I can see what I'm doing. Plugging in the second pad allows for some interesting hijinks, with a tap of the B button clearing any nearby enemies, but more interestingly, giving you access to a free roaming camera to get unique perspectives of the levels. I actually really loved this, and I was pretty impressed with the views you could get here. As a big fan of the series, this was really awesome to see. Clearing the enemies, I couldn't seem to progress any further, with the big doors never opening that I had assumed would grant you access to the next area. I actually enjoyed playing through this section of the game. The next portion, appropriately titled Stairs, is, funnily enough, a big set of stairs. As you roam into the opening portion of the room, you are faced with a pair of lightning-toting wizards, leaving you with little choice but to dispatch their sorry behinds. There is a random flame in the middle of the room that didn't seem to have any interactive qualities, but heading up the stairs I enjoyed taking out these skeletons with the axe sub-weapon. I found this particularly fun and satisfying. On this occasion, the doors to the next portion open, and progressing onwards you find yourself moving on to the next section that the area select refers to as the hall. The hall is unsurprisingly exactly that. However, in approaching it, you have to cross a bridge littered with enemies, and due to the perspective I didn't see a gap, which you had to jump across, leaving me to fall into a dark abyss. However, rather than die, I began making like a snowman, walking in the air as glitching and all kinds of other tomfoolery occurred around me. I couldn't return back to the playable surfaces of the game, so after rebooting the level I tried again, this time clearing the jump to the main hall where a gang of unruly wizards attacked me once again. Pretty fun stuff, and I found I was starting to get more used to Sonia's gameplay. Next up is the level titled Corridor, and this is where we hit a snag. Whereas on the PC the level can be accessed via emulation, on Dreamcast it all goes a bit wrong. The game crashes and freezes up, with only the HUD showing over a completely black screen. There's seemingly nothing you can do in this instance other than reset the machine, so for my PC-less self, this is where my look at this particular stage ends. No harm. Thankfully there's one more area in the disc, and that's the chapel. This is a church type area with a crumbled floor revealing portions of lava underneath. Falling down here didn't seem to hurt you much, however I also couldn't seem to get out again. Another level restart it is, I guess. There are a variety of enemies strewn around as the level hounds you with all manner of projectiles and attacks to avoid as you strive to clear out your attackers. It's a pretty cool area, and I particularly enjoyed the boomerang weapon you got here, which was very effective in taking out the cloaked apparitions, very satisfying to use. At some point, I noticed the big doors at the end of the room had opened, granting access to another portion of the stage, and entering, you find yourself with what is the end of stage boss. A big Medusa enemy, with two phases starting out with this menacing green monster with her boobies out. Thankfully my capture is standard definition, and you could barely discern anything, otherwise YouTube would be on our backs worse than drool at a Coldplay concert. Then finally, we get this big flying face. It's pretty harmless save for its brief charge attacks, where it darts towards you, but the awesome boomerang made short work of it and sent it packing to a fiery grave. And check it out, much in the old tradition, we have the orb that finishes the level. Unfortunately it just materializes and doesn't offer you the option of catching it in the air, but I guess you can't have everything. And I'm sure one more day of development would have meant this feature is top of the list had it continued. So to conclude, you don't get a whole lot outside of a pretty glitchy first stage, but compared to the nothing we used to have, this is a decent glimpse of what could have been, as massively unfinished as it is. But you know what? I enjoyed it. Is it brilliant? No. Does it show a lot of promise? Probably not. Would I have played it? Darn right. I love me some Castlevania, and without question I would have wanted to push past any shortcomings and give this a good go. And who knows, with a little refinement there could possibly have been something here. Konami themselves might not have thought so, and I don't see a whole lot of praise from people online, but I'm an optimistic individual. Sometimes. In my head there's a world where Castlevania on the Dreamcast bolted out of its stable and conquered the world, giving the series a foothold as a 3D behemoth. And where people say, yeah, Symphony of the Night is pretty cool, but did you ever play Resurrection? And yeah, optimism might be giving way to delusion a little bit, but who knows, in an alternate timeline it could well have happened. All I need now is Sam Beckett to rock up, put right what once went wrong, as we so often say here at Gaming for Ages. Anyway, take it easy gaming guys and girls, and keep it locked here on Gaming for Ages for more retro goodness soon. Laters.